Continuing along in this review of basic concepts that will be helpful to you, offering spiritual companionship to adult survivors of child sexual abuse. This session, we'll talk about your first encounters, experiences, exchanges you're likely to have, and responses that can be most helpful to survivors on what to expect from your first encounter, which may be casually, maybe more formally. Many priests actually find that survivors come into confession where they feel safest to broach the topic for the first time in their lives. No matter where that may happen, this is to talk about ways you may want to understand how the person approaches you, and also some things you can do to make that first encounter. Just by way of reminder, I am qualified in a sense, in an odd sense, to offer you these insights, having been a survivor of child sexual abuse by clergy over a 10-year period of childhood and teens. And I now have a website, teresagreen.org, offering you information about how you can help people make it through that first encounter, which is just so terrifying. I can say from experience. My work now is helping others integrate their faith in Christ into whatever mix of recovery programs they have to help them overcome a history of abuse in their background, and also letting that healing be infused with grace so that we can reconcile ourselves with what happened to us, also within the relationships of our past and our present, and even with our relationship with God, and possibly with. This is done keeping in mind the idea of a trajectory of hope. Now, from a point of view of first encountering a survivor of abuse, for example, somebody who hints or tells you that they were abused in any kind of setting, the fact that person could very well be at the stage where they still very much are in a victim frame of mind. They're early in the trajectory. Or they could be somebody who has survived, who's made some level of peace, and are doing okay. But it's time for them to share, possibly to reconcile with God over anger that may remain with them even after a number of the recovery efforts have been quite. More likely, you're likely to see people show up who are survivors. They're thriving in certain parts of their life. For example, let's say their career is going great, or their job is going great, but personally things are either a shambles, or they are in a very private pain and isolated from everyone else in their family. And the chances are they're probably a little bit of a victim, a little bit thriving, a little bit surviving. It's much more mixed. Survivor. Now, these first encounters that you have, I'm going to go through 6 aspects. What are the catalysts that make it happen? What's the challenge? What are the emotions that are likely to be at play? What are the behaviors you're possibly going to be seeing, including what are some of the lessons that we're unlearning based on the lies that I've spoken to you about? Also, I want you to take a moment to take a look at the shock waves that can happen when someone decides it's time to recover, and also some can have. Now, one of the most likely catalysts is that people come face to face with their substance abuse. It's believed that sometimes between 70 and 90% of people who abuse substances are running from traumatic experiences in their childhood, very commonly childhood sexual abuse. Now, that doesn't mean all substance abusers were abused as children, and it does not mean all people who were abused as children are going to abuse substances. I did not. But there is quite an overlap, and it heaps a whole nother level of problems to contend with before you can get back to the memories. First, you got to get clean from your, or you're self-abusing in some other way, like cutting. Very, very common for people who've been abused as children. And as I've mentioned before, sometimes that pain is fantastic in the sense that it overwhelms the deeper psychic pain of abuse that you can't escape. Suicide offers a similar escape. And all of these abusive behaviors are actually in some ways, quotation marks, permissible, because they just continue the work of the most dominant adult of your childhood, who is the abuser. Also, you might encounter somebody whose relationships are in a shambles. It's not uncommon during divorce or annulment processes for people to finally face the thing in the past that they haven't been able to share, but through the breakup of their families, they have to face that something has really hobbled them in their decision-making process to choose a well life. Similarly, you may find people who are involved with dangerous persons, who are living very dangerous, reckless lives for puzzling reasons. There could be many other reasons, but one could be as people who survived the trauma of being abused violently as children. The fact is, so what? That's what life is. You don't even notice that it's, and you don't know how to choose other. And then there are people who are coping with various acute and mental illnesses, most commonly depression, but there are many different types. And then there are the far greater majority of people who are living lives of profoundly private agony. And what will happen is either something will come to a crisis. Either you'll need to clear out your substances, or the fact is you just realize you can't go on anymore. The pain is too great. Sometimes you feel the pain because life has gotten so safe that you finally are safe enough, you can finally stop running. And in a puzzling way, it all catches up with you just when life gets. The challenge is to reach out for a survivor, to reach out and make an effort for that first encounter. We are overcoming all the lies that we were told were reality. We were shown were reality. Surrender, reaching out, being vulnerable is inviting annihilation. Seeking caring feels crazy because we know caring is grooming that leads to annihilation. Trusting anything you have to say to us, how else can you offer us help? But we'll think they're lies, even though we know they're not. And any power imbalance, i.e. us in need and you having something to offer like care, equals danger. It'll be a very anxiety-producing moment, and it's likely that the survivor will drop a hint or tell you one fact and just see how you react. And it may take many years and your companionship to just hear enough that helps this person let. You'll come across a lot of strange emotions, I suppose, from your point of view. For example, most of us feel enormous shame over what happened. We will have no concept of our own innocence. That's part of the horror of abuse. Looking at it from the outside, it's why very few people realize the extent of the damage or the evil. We need to grieve. As children, we might not even have known how to grieve. As adults, we will have to grieve that to let it go. And we might not even know it's grief. It may be sorrow, it may be depression. Similarly, depression may show up as rage. Bear in mind, rage makes a lot of sense. Somebody should have been mad for us. At least we're mad for ourselves. It's a starting point. But again, these emotions can be quite overwhelming to us, quite scary, very hard to put into proper perspective of a whole life. So of course they're not going to be quite comfortable for you either. And it will be very, very confusing to us that we're stepping out of this messy but known order that we created from our childhood and saying we're going to reorder our whole life somehow. How? We don't know. We're going to be confused, we're going to be scared, and we're going to be very vulnerable. So there are going to be behaviors that we fall back into to protect ourselves and our vulnerability. We may come across extremely guarded, or we may come across as extremely defensive because we slip back into an identity of an abused child. We may be extremely withholding because we just can't overcome the stronger side of ourselves that says trust no one, or not knowing how to share of ourselves we'll be overexposing ourselves far too fast, possibly to too many people, just because we don't have the skills. You start at ground zero when you come back and try to start healing. One of the lessons that we have to unlearn, for example, is that we won't be annihilated trusting you. Until we learn that, and we relearn it with each person that we trust, we will seem sometimes controlling or defiant or servile. You need to understand that if we're being, for example, servile, we're coming from a place of memory, a memory of being annihilated, but we're also coming from a place of hope that that is proven wrong. And there's an insight into your role. Similarly, we're unlearning that caring is nothing but grooming. Caring is something other than being manipulated for somebody else's means. There can be somebody who cares for us in and of what is our good, who is willing for our good. Until we come to that, we will be distrustful, we'll be defensive, we might even overreact, or we might misinterpret what you're doing and suddenly make you feel a little bit guilty, like, gee, I didn't mean that. You need to understand that there's a mix of the past and the present in our early interactions with you. It's not necessarily... And the shock waves that we're dealing with go far beyond the complete tornado of emotion and confusion in our own mind when we make those initial steps for help. The shock waves are hitting families, for example. Not all, but some people are actually walking out of families that are still dysfunctional, where the abuser may even still be active, or if perhaps passed away, is still revered. There's a huge price for some people to speak the truth in that setting. There are people who are completely rejected and disowned by their families merely for speaking the truth that they were abused. This can be true of the original family or of the primary family. Indeed, it can really upset the apple cart and how relationships have sort of formed around this person's harm, this person's wounds. The shockwave can happen in friendships, for example. You're acting kind of nervous and strange as a survivor, but all of a sudden maybe you're saying to friends, I can't accept your abuse because I'm seeking a wholeness. I'm seeking to respect myself now. Suddenly I'm realizing you don't respect me. A lot of friendships can break up if they're not healthy. And certainly the shockwaves run through parishes and communities in those situations where someone who is revered, someone who seemed harmless or benign, as so often is the case, is outed as having been a predator of children. That's why your first responses, will keep repeating, can be very, very simple. And that's a few simple truths into a person who's emerging from a web of lies. One is your own true sorrow that they would be hurt. If you're associated with the church, such as a sister, a priest, a deacon, to say you apologize on behalf of the church is a reasonable thing to do. And also to affirm to this person it's not their fault. To draw that line between what we are as we stand in front of you, which we were innocent children, and all of the evil and the complexity that builds up around hiding child abuse. And then to do the most radical thing possible. The most radical statement possible is to say that this person is loved. Over the years, I've internalized that statement from my bishop and from Father Mealy and others who are spiritual companions, saying to me that I am loved. I'm loved by God. Jesus came and did save me. I don't always believe that. I've accepted that there are things I don't necessarily completely get over. But I do have people's voices now, people who are credible, who I trust, who can speak to me. And you can be that too. So your role is very simple, is to listen, is to affirm, not judge, is to respect what this person is as they stand in front of you, no matter how shaky, scared, how kind of like odd they're behaving. Remember, we are survivors if we're standing in front of you, and that there's a lot of tenacity in that person standing in front of you, and there's a lot of creativity that got them out of hell. And then you get to reflect that to them. You get to see those beautiful things that it's very hard to see when you're walking into therapy, when you're seeking help. You're feeling a lot of shame if you're a survivor. I did. Most do. But to reflect our tenacity, our resilience to us is a very powerful thing. This concludes a quick overview of some of the issues you may encounter when you first meet a survivor of child abuse as an adult. And now maybe we'll dive a little deeper and look into the kind of emotional impact you may experience when you meet us, but also the kind of emotions we're struggling with. And in the meantime, remember there are many resources for you at the website teresagreen.org. There are as many YouTube videos as I can get up there on Restoring Sanctuary channel, and there is the book Veronica's. Thank you again, and this is my email address for congratulations, for ideas, suggestions, requests, criticisms, and so forth. Thank you for your time. God bless us, one and all.